The day they almost never met. The world often remembers great stories that began with a single meeting, a moment when two lives crossed at the right time. But few ever think about how many beautiful stories almost never happened at all. This one began on a quiet morning in Los Angeles, long before fame, long before red carpets and cameras. Keanu Reeves had just finished another late-night motorcycle ride, his helmet still warm from the road, his heart heavy with thoughts that never seemed to rest. That same morning, Sandra Bullock was hurrying across the city, late for an acting workshop she didn't even want to attend. Neither of them knew that fate was setting the stage for something extraordinary. It was supposed to rain that day. The sky was gray and soft, the kind of morning when people stayed home. Keanu was sitting at a corner cafe drinking black coffee, lost in quiet thoughts. He had just received another rejection call for a film he believed in. His friend told him to move on, to choose something easier, something more commercial. But Keanu's mind never worked that way. He wanted meaning, not fame. He wanted roles that spoke about life, love, and loss. His phone buzzed again, but he ignored it. He was tired of noise. Across town, Sandra was running up a flight of wet stairs, her umbrella turned inside out by the wind. She had been told this workshop might help her career, but all she wanted was to go home. She had spent weeks doubting herself, feeling invisible among hundreds of faces chasing the same dream. The world of acting was cruel, filled with people pretending to care. She didn't know it yet, but this very day, the one she almost skipped, was about to change everything. Inside the workshop building, the lights flickered. A thunderstorm rolled in. The director running the class sighed and said they'd have to wait a few minutes for the rest of the attendees. Keanu entered quietly, rain dripping from his jacket. He wasn't supposed to be there either. He had come only because a friend forced him. The room was small with wooden floors and the smell of wet paint. People whispered, avoiding eye contact, everyone trying to look confident. Keanu sat near the back, away from the noise. Sandra, late as always, burst in through the door, breathless, her hair messy, her hands full of papers that slipped to the floor. For a second, no one helped. The instructor kept talking. But Keanu stood up silently and started picking up her papers. His movements were gentle, almost hesitant, as if kindness was something private he didn't want others to see. Sandra looked at him and smiled, embarrassed. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once and went back to his seat. That was it. No big moment, no spark of destiny, just a simple act of kindness between two strangers. The class began an hour later than planned. The instructor divided them into pairs for a small improv scene. As luck, or fate, would have it, Sandra was paired with Keanu. The assignment was simple. Perform a short emotional scene about trust. Sandra rolled her eyes. She wasn't in the mood. But Keanu looked at her quietly and said, "Let's make it real, not just pretend." His tone was calm, honest, and unexpectedly kind. Something about his sincerity caught her attention. When the scene began, the air shifted. Keanu spoke softly, his voice trembling with emotion he didn't fake. Sandra responded, first acting, then feeling. The audience grew silent. It was no longer a class. It was a moment of truth. She felt something inside her shift, a strange recognition, like her soul knew his. When the scene ended, the room stayed quiet. The instructor looked stunned. No one clapped. They didn't need to. Something deeper had been felt by everyone present. After class, Sandra tried to thank him again, but he was already leaving, helmet in hand. He smiled slightly and said, "You're good. Don't let the noise make you doubt that." Then he disappeared into the rain. That was the day they almost never met. That was the day kindness spoke before fame ever did. The next morning, the city woke up to bright sunshine, as if the storm had been only a test. Sandra found a small note in her bag. She didn't remember writing. It said, "Sometimes the quietest meetings make the loudest memories." She laughed softly, thinking maybe the instructor slipped it in. She didn't know Keanu had written it after she left, tucking it between her scattered papers when no one was watching. Weeks passed. Both went back to their struggling lives. Auditions, rejections, long hours, lonely nights. But neither forgot that moment. Sometimes Sandra would replay that scene in her head, the one where she had looked into Keanu's eyes and felt something honest. It reminded her that truth in art begins with truth in heart. Keanu, on the other hand, kept riding his motorcycle through the city at night, stopping by that same cafe, wondering why one small meeting still lived in his mind. Then came the news that would bring them back together. A studio was casting for a movie about love, time, and connection, one that needed two leads with natural chemistry. The director wanted something real, something that could make people believe in destiny. Someone remembered the workshop performance. Both names, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, were written on the casting list. They would soon meet again, not by chance this time, but by something larger than both of them. What no one knew then was that this meeting would not just create a movie. It would create a story of kindness, respect, and deep humanity that would inspire millions. If that rainy day hadn't happened, if she hadn't dropped her papers, if he hadn't stood up to help, the world might never have known what real connection looks like. Sometimes destiny hides behind small accidents, waiting for two people humble enough to see it. And so their paths began to cross again, quietly, softly, beautifully. Neither of them knew the world was watching a story that would remind humanity what kindness truly means. The second chance, the city had changed by the time they met again. Lights were brighter, dreams were louder, and the people chasing them seemed more restless than ever. Months had passed since that rainy morning when Keanu helped Sandra pick up her papers. Both had moved in different directions, trying to build a name in a world that only noticed you when you shouted loud enough. But neither of them had forgotten that moment, the quiet honesty in each other's eyes. One evening, Sandra sat alone in her small apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and audition scripts that all sounded the same. She had just come back from another failed reading, where a casting agent told her she was too soft for the role. Too soft. Those words echoed in her head all night. The world, she realized, didn't reward softness. It rewarded noise, power, confidence. She wanted to quit that night, to pack her things and fly back home to her parents. But something inside her refused. A small, calm voice told her that softness wasn't weakness. Maybe it was her strength. Meanwhile, across town, Keanu was staring at a different kind of emptiness. His apartment was quiet, walls bare except for a few books and a guitar in the corner. He had just finished a small indie film that barely anyone watched. His agent told him to aim higher, to take more commercial projects. But fame never appealed to him. He wanted stories that healed, not just entertained. Still, the silence of waiting for a chance was heavy. And then, as if life decided to remind them of unfinished business, a message arrived for both. The letter was short and unexpected. Casting call. Emotional chemistry test for lead roles in Speed, a film about trust under pressure. Sandra almost threw it away. She thought it was another empty audition, but something about the word trust stopped her. She decided to go. Keanu's agent also insisted. "It's just another tryout," he said. But the director's looking for real emotion, not acting. The day of the audition, the studio was buzzing with people. Bright lights, heavy makeup, endless waiting. Sandra arrived first, wearing a simple shirt and jeans. She sat quietly in a corner, observing others laughing and pretending confidence. When she looked up, she saw him, Keanu, walking through the door with that same calm face, wearing his old leather jacket, carrying his helmet again. For a second, she wondered if he even remembered her. He did. Their eyes met across the room, and something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet recognition. A small smile from her, a gentle nod from him. The director noticed the spark instantly. "You two know each other?" he asked. "Once," Keanu said softly. "Good," the director replied. "Then let's see if that connection is real." The scene they had to perform was intense. Two strangers trapped together, forced to rely on each other in danger. The camera rolled. The room went silent. Keanu looked at her with that same stillness that once made her heart tremble. His words were few but full of meaning. Sandra responded, her voice breaking at the edges, raw and real. For a few minutes, everyone forgot it was acting. It was something else, something deeper. When the scene ended, the director didn't speak. No one did. Finally, he whispered, "We found them. They didn't celebrate." Both walked out into the evening light, silent, unsure how to feel. Outside the studio, Sandra stopped and turned to him. You remembered me, she said. Keanu smiled. You don't forget real moments? She laughed softly. That day changed everything for me. For me too, he said, looking at the sky. I think sometimes kindness leaves a mark that time can't erase. For a moment, neither spoke. There was something peaceful between them, something untouched by the chaos of fame. It was just two people standing in the fading sunlight, quietly grateful for a second chance. Weeks later, filming began. It was harder than they imagined. Long hours, dangerous stunts, exhaustion. But what kept them going wasn't just the movie. It was the silent understanding that they were part of something special. Between takes, they'd talk, not about fame or money, but about life, regrets, and small joys. Sandra would bring coffee for everyone, and Keanu would help the crew move equipment. No ego, no distance, just humility. People on set whispered, saying they had never seen such genuine respect between two actors. But behind those smiles, both carried their own private pain. Keanu was still haunted by the loss of his close friend months earlier. He often sat alone, watching the sunset from the edge of the set, headphones in, lost in thought. Sandra noticed one day and quietly joined him, saying nothing. She didn't ask questions. She just sat beside him, the way someone does when they understand silence better than words. After a long pause, he finally said, Some people leave, but their kindness stays. It's strange, isn't it? She nodded. Maybe kindness is the only thing that never really dies. That moment became the soul of their friendship. It wasn't about acting anymore. It was about being human in a world that forgot how. The movie was released months later and became a huge success. People around the world talked about their chemistry, about how real it felt. But what they didn't know was that it was real. It was born not from rehearsals but from truth, from two broken souls choosing to be kind when the world gave them no reason to be. As their fame grew, interviews and rumors followed. People called them perfect together. Tabloids created stories. But behind the noise, there was only friendship, deep, quiet, pure. They promised to never let fame destroy that. Yet, as life often does, time began to test that promise. More films, more responsibilities, more distance. Their paths started to drift again, even as their names were forever linked. They didn't know it yet, but a twist was waiting ahead, one that would shake both their worlds and remind them why they met in the first place. Because sometimes fate doesn't bring people together for love. Sometimes it brings them together to remind the world what real kindness looks like when life gets difficult again. And for Keanu and Sandra, that reminder was about to arrive in a way neither of them expected. When silence spoke louder than words, fame is strange. It lifts people up where everyone can see them, but it also builds invisible walls around them. Months after their movie became a success, Keanu and Sandra found themselves living in two different worlds, surrounded by people but feeling quietly alone inside. Cameras followed them, interviews filled their days, and rumors filled the spaces between truth and imagination. Everyone saw the smiles, but no one saw the exhaustion behind them. Sandra had started working on another movie, one that demanded every bit of her energy. She was grateful, yet something inside her felt off. There was a kind of emptiness success couldn't fill. She often thought back to the old days, the small cafe, the rain, that quiet moment when Keanu helped her pick up her papers. There had been peace in that moment, honesty that no stage could recreate. Now everything felt loud, too bright, too much. Keanu, meanwhile, was struggling with his own silence. Fame brought him money, fans, and opportunities, but it also brought a kind of loneliness he couldn't explain. People around him expected perfection, but all he wanted was simplicity. He still rode his motorcycle at night, stopping by the same cafe, drinking the same black coffee. Sometimes he would stare at the empty chair across from him and think of that rainy morning. Maybe kindness had been the only real thing in a world made of illusion. Then, one quiet evening, their paths crossed again, not on a film set, but in a hospital hallway. Sandra had come to visit a young fan who had written her a letter. The girl, only 12 years old, was fighting a rare illness and said her dream was to meet the woman who played the brave bus driver in Speed. Sandra walked into the hospital room with flowers and a smile. She sat by the girl's bed, holding her hand and listening to her story. She didn't realize that in another wing of the same hospital, Keanu was also there, visiting the family of a stunt coordinator who had been injured during a film shoot. As Sandra left the room, she heard a familiar voice down the hall. She turned, and there he was. Keanu stood near the vending machine, wearing his usual black jacket, hair tied back, quietly helping an old man who was trying to reach for a drink stuck in the slot. He laughed softly, freed the bottle, and handed it to him. His kindness was the same as always, simple, wordless, genuine. Sandra called his name. He turned, surprised, then smiled the kind of smile that made the noise of the world fade away. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Visiting someone," he said. "And you?" "Same," she replied. They walked together down the quiet corridor, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly. The hospital smelled of medicine and hope. Sandra told him about the little girl who dreamed of meeting her. Keanu listened quietly, then said, "That's the kind of fan who reminds you why you started." They ended up sitting outside in the small hospital garden. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of wet soil and distant rain. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. Their silence felt like a conversation. Only they understood. After a while, Sandra looked up and said softly, "Do you ever wonder if fame takes more than it gives?" Keanu nodded. "It does. It takes your time, your peace, sometimes even your truth. But maybe that's why we have to keep doing small things that remind us we're still human." She smiled at his words, the same calm wisdom that had guided her years ago. "You always say things that make me think," she said. He chuckled quietly. "That's all I ever try to do. Think quietly and act kindly." As they sat there, a nurse approached them. She recognized them instantly and smiled nervously. "The little girl you visited," she said to Sandra. "She's asking if you could both come see her. She loves both of you." Keanu hesitated. "Me? She doesn't even know I'm here. She saw you on TV," the nurse said. "She said you're her favorite actor because you always look like you care, even when you're not talking." Keanu's expression softened. "Then we should go," he said. Together, they entered the room again. The girl's eyes lit up. She couldn't speak much, but her face said everything. Sandra sat beside her while Keanu quietly fixed the blanket on her lap. The girl whispered, "You two look like friends who never forget each other." They both smiled. Sandra held the girl's hand while Keanu gently placed a small origami flower on her bedside table. "This is for you," he said. "A reminder that kindness is stronger than pain." That night, neither of them could sleep. Sandra kept thinking about how fragile life was, how short moments could become memories that last forever. Keanu stayed awake too, writing in his notebook, something he did when emotions became too heavy for words. On one page he wrote, "Some meetings are not accidents. They are gentle reminders from life to stay kind, no matter what fame tries to turn you into." Days later, Sandra returned to the hospital to check on the girl. But she was gone. Her bed was empty. The nurse handed Sandra a folded note left behind. It read, "Thank you for reminding me that the world still has kind people." Sandra cried quietly in her car that night. When she called Keanu to tell him, he didn't speak for a while. Then he simply said, "Her kindness reached us before ours reached her." That's how life works sometimes. In that moment, they both understood something deeper than any movie could ever show. That kindness isn't about fixing everything. It's about being present even in silence. Their bond grew stronger after that day. They started meeting more often, not for fame, not for work, but for quiet reasons. Coffee in small cafes, walks in public parks, visits to local shelters. They didn't post pictures, didn't make announcements. They believed real kindness never needed applause. But just as peace began to return, another challenge waited ahead. A storm that would test their friendship, their patience, and the lessons they had learned about humility and compassion. Because even the kindest hearts are not safe from misunderstanding. And the next chapter of their story would begin with a painful one, a rumor that threatened to break the bond that kindness had built. When the world misunderstood, the rumor started with a single photograph. Camera flash in the dark, a quick headline. a half-truth that spread like wildfire. One evening, after weeks of quiet visits to the children's hospital, Keanu and Sandra were photographed leaving together under a single umbrella. She was laughing at something he said, and he was looking at her with his usual calm smile. To them, it was a small, private moment between two friends who had seen too much pain that day to care about the rain. But to the world, it became a story. The next morning, tabloids screamed headlines about their secret love, about late-night meetings, about hidden chemistry. People online made up stories faster than truth could catch up. Television shows debated their relationship, and even fans who once admired their kindness started choosing sides. The peace they had, carefully built, the quiet friendship based on mutual respect, suddenly felt invaded. Sandra woke up to hundreds of messages. Her agent sounded nervous. "We can't control this now," he said. "It's everywhere. Maybe you should say something." She didn't. She didn't want to add noise to something built in silence. Keanu, on the other hand, said even less. He turned off his phone and went for a long motorcycle ride, trying to outrun the feeling that the world had twisted something pure into something loud. For days, neither of them spoke. It wasn't anger, it was sadness. They both knew the media didn't care about truth, only drama. But still, it hurt. They had promised to protect their friendship from fame, and now fame had found its way in, a week later. They met again, this time in a small coffee shop hidden between quiet streets. The kind of place where no one cared who they were. The air smelled of cinnamon and rain. Sandra sat by the window, her eyes tired but kind. Keanu arrived quietly, as always, carrying 2 coffees. He slid one toward her without saying a word. "It's strange," she said softly, staring at the steam rising from her cup. "How people can't believe a man and woman can simply care about each other." Keanu nodded. "They confuse kindness with romance. Maybe because they've forgotten what kindness really looks like." She smiled faintly. "They talk like they know our story, but they don't know the moments between the moments." He looked out the window. "Let them talk. We know the truth." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the rain tapping on the glass. Then Keanu spoke again, almost to himself. "Maybe this is what happens when the world sees something it doesn't understand. It tries to name it, even if it's wrong." She looked at him carefully. "And what do we do?" "We stay kind," he said simply. "Even when they don't." That became their quiet promise. But the noise didn't stop. Reporters followed them, fans speculated, and film studios started using their rumored chemistry as a selling point. Both of them began to feel trapped. Sandra, who had always believed in privacy, started to withdraw. Keanu noticed it. One day on set, between takes, he walked up to her and asked gently, "Are you okay?" She nodded quickly, pretending to be fine. But her eyes said otherwise. Later that evening, when everyone left, he stayed behind. They sat on the edge of the set, lights dim, air filled with quiet tension. "You know," he said softly, "kindness isn't always about helping others. Sometimes it's about forgiving them for not knowing better." She looked at him, confused. "Forgiving who?" "The people who misunderstand. The ones who spread noise. Maybe they just don't have enough real kindness in their lives to recognize it when they see it." Those words broke something open inside her. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness but from relief. She leaned back against the wall and whispered, "You always make it sound simple." He smiled. "It is simple. It's just not easy." That night, something changed between them. Not romance, but a deeper understanding. They began to see that their bond wasn't fragile. It was strong enough to survive even the world's noise. Soon after, Sandra decided to speak publicly. Not to defend, but to teach. She went on a talk show where she was expected to deny the rumors. Instead, she said something that stunned everyone. "The world loves stories about drama," she began, "but the story I live is about kindness. Sometimes, a friend can change your life without saying a single romantic word. And if people can't see that, maybe it's time they remember that friendship can be the purest form of love." For a moment, the audience stayed silent. Even the host didn't know what to say. The clip went viral, not as gossip but as inspiration. People started sharing their own stories of friendship, of quiet acts of kindness that never made the news. When Keanu saw the interview, he didn't call her. He didn't send flowers or texts. He simply left a note at her door. It said, "You reminded the world what love without noise looks like." The next morning, Sandra found the note beside a small plant, a white lily. She smiled softly, and slowly the noise began to fade. Not completely, but enough. In the months that followed, they focused on projects that meant something, films that carried messages of hope, loss, and humanity. They visited shelters together, supported hospitals quietly, and funded scholarships anonymously. No press, no attention, no announcements. They called it doing without declaring. But as their bond deepened, fate was about to test them again. Not through gossip this time, but through pain. A tragedy was coming, one that would shake Keanu's world to its core and once again show Sandra what true resilience looks like. Because sometimes, the loudest lessons in life are born from moments when words aren't enough, when silence, love, and kindness must carry the weight of everything left unsaid. The quiet heartbreak life has a way of testing gentle souls, especially the ones who give kindness freely. Months after the rumors faded and peace slowly returned, Keanu received a phone call that changed everything. It was short, quiet, and final. A close friend he had known for years, someone who worked with him on small charity projects, had passed away in an accident on a mountain road. The loss came without warning. One minute they were making plans for another children's fundraiser, and the next, there was only silence on the other end of the line. Keanu didn't cry at first. He simply sat still, the world blurring around him. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but heavy. "Life takes the good ones fast," he whispered to himself. That night he didn't go home. He drove aimlessly through Los Angeles, ending up at the old cafe where he had first met Sandra years ago. It was closed now, windows dusty, lights gone. Yet he sat outside on his motorcycle, staring at the dark windows as if they held every memory he couldn't say aloud. Sandra found out the next morning from a mutual friend. She called him immediately, but he didn't pick up. She texted, then drove to his place worried. When he finally opened the door, he looked tired. Not physically, but spiritually. His eyes carried a quiet pain that needed no words. She didn't ask anything. She just walked in, sat down beside him, and placed a mug of coffee in his hands. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them felt sacred, like a space where grief could breathe without interruption. Finally, he said softly, he was one of the few people who believed in doing things quietly. No cameras, no posts, just real help. He said kindness without witnesses is the purest kind. Sandra listened, her own eyes filling. "That's how you've always lived too," she said. He looked down. "Sometimes I wonder if that's why people forget us so easily." "No," she replied firmly. "They don't forget. They just don't always understand the quiet ones right away." That evening, she convinced him to take a break from everything, from movies, from schedules, from all the noise. They drove to a small lakeside cabin outside the city, a place she knew from years ago. There were no phones, no reporters, no distractions. Just still water, tall trees, and the kind of silence that heals. The first few days were heavy. Keanu barely spoke. He spent hours sitting by the water, staring at the ripples. Sandra didn't try to cheer him up. She just stayed near, quietly making tea, reading books aloud sometimes, or sitting beside him in silence. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, he finally broke his silence. "You know," he said, "when you lose people, it feels like the world becomes quieter. But maybe that's when you start hearing what really matters." She turned to him. "What do you hear now?" He thought for a long time. "Kindness," he said softly. "Not as a word, but as a way of living. My friend used to say every act of love plants something invisible. Maybe that's what we're supposed to leave behind. Invisible gardens." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what you've been building all along, Keanu. You just never looked back to see how much it's grown." That night, something gentle shifted between them again. Not romance, not a confession, just a deep recognition. Two souls who had carried the world's noise and pain, finally finding peace in silence. In the days that followed, they visited small towns nearby, quietly helping where they could. At one gas station, Keanu noticed an old man struggling to fix his car. He walked over, knelt down, and helped him without introducing himself. The man thanked him with a tired smile, not recognizing who he was. Sandra watched from a distance, feeling her eyes sting. She whispered to herself, "This is what the world never sees." Later that night, she asked him, "Why do you always help without telling anyone?" He looked at her calm as ever. "Because kindness loses its truth the moment it needs applause." Those words stayed with her. And one morning she wrote them down on a piece of paper and placed it in her journal. Beneath the quote, she added one line of her own. "The world would be emptier if I hadn't met him." When they returned to the city weeks later, something in Keanu had healed, but another test was waiting. While they were away, a tabloid had published old photos again, twisting their friendship into something dramatic. This time, it wasn't just harmless gossip. It affected Sandra's new project, and her producers started to pressure her to distance herself. She was torn. She didn't want to hurt him, but she also knew her career was fragile. One evening, she met with Keanu at their usual quiet park. She told him everything, voice trembling. He listened silently, then nodded. "I understand," he said. "No," she whispered. "You don't. I hate that I have to explain something that should never need explaining." He gave a small smile. "You owe no one an explanation. Not me, not them. We both know the truth, and that's enough." She looked at him, her eyes wet. "Why do you never get angry?" "Because anger only makes noise," he said softly. "And I've spent my life trying to protect the quiet things." Her heart broke at those words. She wanted to tell him how much his kindness had changed her, how much his friendship meant, how she'd never met someone who carried pain with such grace. But before she could speak, he stood up, nodded gently, and said, "Some connections don't need to be declared. They just live." And then he walked away, not out of anger, but peace. Days turned into weeks. They didn't see each other. The world thought they had drifted apart, and maybe they had, at least in distance. But inside, something stronger held them together. Then one evening, as Sandra sat in her apartment watching the rain, a package arrived. No name, no note, just a wooden box. Inside was a small folded paper with 6 words written in Keanu's handwriting. "The world still needs your kindness." Beneath it was a bracelet made of simple silver wire. On the inside, engraved so faintly she almost missed it, were the words, "For the quiet ones." She closed her eyes and smiled through her tears. What she didn't know yet was that their story wasn't over. A final chapter was waiting, one that would bring everything full circle. A moment when the world would finally see what real friendship, real humility, and real kindness could do. The kindness that stayed. Months had passed since that quiet evening when Keanu walked away, leaving only the bracelet and a note. The world had moved on to new headlines, new stories, new distractions. But for Sandra, time seemed slower, softer. She wore the bracelet every day, hidden beneath her sleeve, a silent reminder of the kind of friendship that didn't need words to exist. She had started to change without realizing it. Her interviews were calmer, her voice more grounded, her work more meaningful. She began funding small charities anonymously. A school here, a clinic there, always leaving behind the same message Keanu once said. Kindness loses its truth the moment it needs applause. It became her quiet motto. Then, one afternoon, an email arrived that made her heart pause. It was from a film festival in Japan, inviting her to a tribute event for Keanu Reeves. She frowned in confusion. He hadn't told her about any event. The letter said he was being honored for his years of humanitarian work done quietly, without credit. Most of his donations had been anonymous, rebuilding hospitals, funding children's programs, paying medical bills for strangers. But one of the recipients had discovered the truth and wanted the world to finally know. For a moment, she sat frozen, staring at the screen. All those years, all those quiet disappearances, all those late-night rides and missed interviews. Now she understood what he had been doing. Kindness had been his real career. 2 weeks later, she flew to Tokyo for the event. The theater was filled with people from different walks of life, doctors, volunteers, teachers, and children, all whose lives had been touched by his generosity. The stage lights were soft, golden, peaceful. Sandra sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly. When Keanu finally walked on stage, the crowd rose to their feet. He looked the same, calm eyes, humble posture, wearing a simple black suit with no tie. He waited for the applause to die down, then spoke in a voice steady but gentle. "I never planned for any of this," he began. "I just believed that small acts matter. Sometimes we wait for the world to change, but the truth is, the world changes quietly, one kind choice at a time. I don't deserve this honor. The real heroes are the people who give without expecting anything back." His words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Sandra felt tears fill her eyes. He hadn't changed. Fame hadn't touched his heart. He was still the same man who once helped a stranger pick up scattered papers in a rainy workshop years ago. After the speech, as the crowd mingled, he finally saw her. For a moment, neither of them moved. The noise faded, the lights dimmed, and it felt like the rest of the world disappeared. She walked up to him slowly, her bracelet glinting faintly under the light. "You didn't tell me?" she said softly. He smiled. "It wasn't supposed to be told. But people should know what you've done," she said, her voice breaking. He shook his head gently. "They don't need to. They just need to remember they can do the same." She looked at him, trying to hold back tears. "You always say things that sound so simple, but they stay forever." "That's because truth is simple," he replied. "We just forget it when life gets loud." They stood there for a long time, surrounded by people but feeling completely alone in their own quiet world. Then the event organizers asked for a group photo. Everyone whose lives had been touched by his kindness. Doctors, students, widows, artists, all stood behind him holding candles. When Sandra stepped beside him, she whispered, "You started this. You brought light." He turned slightly, his eyes soft. "No," he said. "We all did. I just never stopped believing in it." The next day, news of the tribute spread everywhere. For once, the headlines weren't about scandals or gossip. They were about kindness, about how one man had changed thousands of lives without ever asking for credit. People online called it the kindness ripple. But even with all the praise, Keanu stayed quiet. He went back to his simple life, still taking the subway, still helping strangers, still disappearing into the background of his own story. A few weeks later, Sandra invited him to visit the same children's hospital where they had once met that brave little girl years ago. It had been rebuilt since then. New walls, brighter colors, and a plaque near the entrance that read, "Inspired by unseen kindness." When they walked inside, the nurses smiled and whispered, but neither paid attention. They spent the afternoon talking to patients, telling stories, drawing pictures with the kids. As they were leaving, a small boy ran up to them and handed Keanu a handmade card. It said, "Thank you for helping people you don't know." Keanu knelt down, smiled, and asked, "Why did you write that?" The boy shrugged shyly. "Because my mom said good people don't always wear capes. Sometimes they just walk quietly and fix hearts." Keanu laughed softly, his eyes shining with tears. "Your mom is right." When they walked out of the hospital that evening, the sky was painted gold. Sandra looked at him and said, "Do you ever think about that day, the first one when we met?" He nodded slowly. "Every time it rains," he said. She smiled. "If we hadn't met that day, if you hadn't helped me—" He finished her sentence. "The world would have missed this story." They both stood silently, the sunset reflecting in their eyes. No words could capture the journey they had shared. From strangers in a workshop to friends who reminded the world that kindness can change everything. Years later, when people talked about them, they didn't just speak of their movies. They spoke of the quiet legacy they left behind, a legacy built not on fame or fortune, but on gentle acts that made others believe again. Their story became a reminder passed down through generations that even the smallest act of kindness can ripple across time, touching lives we'll never see in ways we'll never know. And somewhere, in a small cafe on a rainy morning, the memory of that first meeting still lived, in the sound of falling rain, in the warmth of 2 cups of coffee, and in the quiet truth that kindness once given never really ends.